Praise the Lord, YouTube family. This is Apostolic Audio Ministries. My name is Brother Chris Lips. This YouTube channel is dedicated to bringing apostolic Pentecostal messages to you, like when you're working around the house, if you're working from home, if you're in the car. This YouTube channel allows you to listen to those messages while you're doing various important things during this difficult time of the coronavirus and COVID-19. I'm actually broadcasting from my bedroom at home here in Kentucky. I am not able to be in my home church today. None of us are, although my church did do a live stream, and it was a wonderful service, but it just wasn't the same. So until we can be back in the actual church building, this will be what we do for now. The church building is not the church. You are the church. Just remember that. Just because you're not in the building does not mean you get out of jail free card. You still need to be encouraged. You still need to be lifted up. You still need to be there for your pastor, for your assistant pastor, for the various people in your church. Be an encouragement to them. They need you during this time. You think just because they're spiritual that they got everything sorted out, that everything's all right, that they need to be the ones encouraging you. No, sometimes you need to encourage them. If they're going to help others, they need to be encouraged themselves. Just remember, they all need you just like you need them. So let's just get started on that, shall we? Real quick, self-promotion. This is a screenshot from Amazon.com. Both of my books are still available. The first book, entitled In a Baby's Eye, the publisher is actually out of business. So whatever they have at Amazon and whatever I have at home is probably all you're going to see until I get it republished or whatever happens. I'm not sure what's going to happen. But you still have access to this book from Amazon. And then the second book, In a Father's Eye, this is still in print through Dog Ear Publishing. You can order from there. You can order from Barnes & Noble, from Books A Million, or Amazon. They do have limited supply. I have one copy here at home, and I want to keep it. But these are just two books that I have written, and I need to finish the third one. I really need to. But anyway, enough about that. That's not why we're here. So let's get on to today's message, shall we? Please find your Bible and hit pause to be able to find this scripture, because sometimes I make mistakes, and you want to make sure that I stay in the book. You want to make sure that I am reading from the Bible. And I will be doing King James Version. I won't be doing some other version. So please just kind of follow along with me. Joshua chapter 7, verse 2. It reads this: And Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Bethaven, on the east side of Bethel, and spake unto them, saying, Go up and view the country. And the men went up and viewed Ai. Verse number 3. And they returned to Joshua, and said unto him, Let not all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up, and smite Ai. And make not all the people to labor thither, for they are but few. So these men are basically saying the men of Ai are but few, so we don't need to send everybody. We've got this. Verse 4. So there went up thither of the people about 3,000 men, and they fled before the men of Ai. Now I want you to skip over to chapter 8, verse 1. We're going to skip over, but we're going to come back to all this, so don't worry. And the Lord said unto Joshua, Fear not, neither be thou dismayed. Take all the people of war with thee, and arise, go up to Ai. See, I have given into thy hand the king of Ai, and his people and his city and his land. So just for a few minutes, now this is going to be a very personal message. This is not going to be just something that off the top of my head. This has a special meaning, so please bear with me and follow along, because I am going somewhere today just like I do on the other messages. So please stay with me and follow along. So give me just a little bit, and I want to preach on this thought: returning to the place of failure. Returning to the place of failure. I've actually known several people over the years. For instance, I know somebody in our church, and I love this man so much, but I have asked him to participate in Christmas plays. I needed him to do parts, but Christmas has a very, I guess, a very negative attachment, because one of his best friends, or someone that he knew very well, actually died during that time. So he doesn't really like to, he kind of likes to be to himself on Christmas. And he said that he doesn't even like to go past that same spot where his friend died in the automobile accident. He doesn't even like to pass by there. He doesn't want to return to that place of failure, that place where he lost his friend, the place where his friend lost his life. So it's not just about the man that I go to church with, it's also about losing a life. So just for a few minutes, I want to talk about returning to the place of failure. We talked about just a few minutes ago, excuse me, we talked about Joshua. So let's kind of back up and go just a little bit backward. Make sure it's still recording. Okay. Now this is after the death of Moses, when all the land that was promised to Israel, the promised land, where Joshua was supposed to lead them over, because Moses, where he sinned against God, where he got angry and he was supposed to speak to the rock, and he actually struck it twice. So God did not allow Moses to go over into the promised land. But Joshua was allowed to take the people over. So when he did, the first place they were going to go is Jericho. And most of us should remember the story of them marching around the walls of Jericho, around the entire city. They did it once for 6 days. So like the first day did it once, second day did it once, third day, and so on. On the seventh day, they marched around 7 times. And they let out a big shout, and the walls fell flat. And they conquered, they defeated the city of Jericho, which was a great big city. And of course they saved Rahab and her family because of what she had did for the spies. And they saved them, but all the rest of the city they were supposed to destroy. The plunder was not supposed to go to them. Usually when they attacked a city, they were allowed to keep the livestock, the plunder and such. But in this case, God said it was all his, and they were to not take any. So when they took Jericho, a man by the name of Achan saw a Babylonian garment and a wedge of gold and some silver, and he coveted it. He wanted it for himself, despite the warnings from God. Excuse me, sorry, tickle in my throat. So when they defeated Jericho, and then Achan took these things that were accursed, that God wanted for himself, but he took it anyway. When they go and they try to defeat Ai, which was smaller, it says there went up thither of them about 3,000 men. And when they went to, they thought, since they had defeated Jericho so easy, where it was so many people and so large, they thought Ai would be nothing. Their ego was lifted. Their self-esteem was lifted. They knew that with God's help they could do it. But they had no clue, except for Achan, they had no clue that God was not with them during the battle of Ai. So when they went to go fight the Ai and its king and its people, they got defeated and they fled. So Joshua cried out to God, and the people cried out to God, and God said, there is sin in the camp. Someone has done something they should not have done, and you need to take care of that before you can move on. Now, they had already been defeated, so this wasn't just the soldiers, the warriors that got defeated, but it was the wives and the children. They got to hear the stories. It was a defeat for them also. Just because the soldiers were defeated doesn't mean that was the only ones that were affected by this loss, by this non-victory. Everybody in the camps knew they had been defeated by the people of Ai, and they did not understand why God had stepped away from them during this time of victory, during this time of receiving the promised land. So they drew lots, and they found out that it was Achan that had did it, and Joshua stepped up and told him to give God glory and tell the truth. So Achan did. And according to the rules back then, God had Achan and his family and all his things stoned. And then they burned everything. They had to get rid of the sin. They had to get rid of the things of failure. So now it was their job to go back. God told Joshua for the men to go back. And that's where we get to chapter 8, verse 1. It says, and the Lord said unto Joshua, now that you've got the sin out of the camp, now that you've got the things fixed the way it should be, and everything is right, it says, and the Lord said unto Joshua, fear not, neither be thou dismayed. Take all the people of war with thee, and arise. Get up to Ai. See, I have given into thy hand. So God is saying, okay, you've already been defeated here, but you're going to have to return back to this place of failure. I know you all are hurt, but there were reasons why you failed. So I want you to go back. And I'm sure the wives and the children were like, like, honey, you've already been defeated. We've already lost the battle. Why do you want to go back? You're probably going to be hurt this time. You're going to be killed. What are we going to do? And I can just imagine the wives and the children not wanting their fathers and their brothers and their sons, and they don't want them to go into war because of everything that happened previously. They had such a great victory at Jericho. Now they're at Ai. They get defeated. They have to stone Achan and his family and burn all of his stuff. And now God wants them to go back. It was a place of failure for all of them, not just the ones who were actually there during the battle. And before they only had 3,000, and now God says for all of them to go. Says, I have given into thy hand the king of Ai, not just the king and his people, not just the king and his people, but his city. And not just the king and the people in the city, but his land as well. God is saying this is not just going to be a victory over getting away from your failure, but this is going to be a victory beyond what you think is going to happen. Not only are you going to go back to your place of failure and become victorious, you are going to come away with defeating the king and his people and the city and the land. I've heard my pastor, Pastor Craig Thomas, and I've heard my former pastor, Pastor Alan Peevler. I've heard both of them say before that if you are in the middle of a storm and you're going through a serious trial, you should not ask for deliverance. And I imagine when these people fled from Ai, they were like, God, please deliver me. Please deliver me. Well, okay, God will deliver you. He'll get you out of that situation. But here's the thing. It is not God's will for you to be delivered from that situation. You are meant to have victory. And that's what both my pastors have said before. You should never ask for deliverance. You should ask for victory. Because if you keep asking for deliverance, God is going to take you out, but you still got to go back. You still got to return to that place of failure in order to achieve victory. You need to ask God to give you victory over the situation. You don't need to ask God for deliverance. You're going to keep going around the woods, around the wilderness, just like the children of Israel did. Because of everything they did, because of their disobedience to God and wanting deliverance, that they had to march around that wilderness 40 years before they could go into the promised land. If it had not been for that and they wanted victory, there might have been a few battles lost, maybe, but they still would have had victory. But because they wanted deliverance, because they wanted to do things their way, they had to march and march and march and march for 40 years when that land could have been theirs. But even though God still granted victory, and God granted victory over Ai. So, with that being said, time to get into a little bit of the story time for me. I like history. I like telling things that apply to this message, apply to any message that I'm given. So if you indulge me just a few minutes, and I want to tell you, well, let's go to this first. Luke 22 and 32. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. Now I want you to read this very, very carefully. Here's Jesus speaking to the people that are weak, the people that are probably been defeated or asked for deliverance and never got victory, the people that did not want to return to their place of failure. Said, but I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not. And when thou art converted, when you have finally realized that you need victory instead of deliverance, when you finally realize that you're going to have to go back to that place of failure, and you will have victory, after you're converted, strengthen thy brethren. There's someone else that's in the same boat as you. There's someone else that needs victory, not deliverance, but victory in their life. It's not just you that's going through stuff. There are other people. There's husbands and fathers and mothers and wives and children and just pastors and assistant pastors and music leaders. Our world leaders, President Trump, he needs encouragement. Our Vice President Mike Pence, they need encouragement. You think they got everything under control? They wouldn't be able to do anything without God's help. None of us could. And they don't need deliverance. We need victory from this coronavirus. We need victory from this COVID-19 and all these things that are going on. And I can get all political and I can say this or that, but I'm not going to, because that's not what this is about. This is not a political channel. This is a encouraging and motivating YouTube channel. So let's get on to that. But anyway, his name is Hasan Davis, and he has written a book called Written Off. It says how one man's journey through poverty, disability, and delinquency is transforming the juvenile justice system. Hasan Davis, Mr. Davis, he wrote this book, and I've read the book. He went through grade school in St. Louis, Missouri. He was a poor, and I want to be careful here. I don't want to say black. I don't want to say African American. But this, you can see by the picture that he is a different race than Caucasian. But that's okay. He is still a man. He still had situations. But anyway, this black man, we'll just say that. No disrespect. But this black man, he grew up in grade school in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, he grew up during this time in the early 1970s. And during that time, a lot of the things that we have now with children, they had them then too, but had not identified the situations. For instance, someone with this dyslexia would be considered like retarded or handicapped or a troubled child, someone that the teachers can't handle. Someone with ADHD would just be someone with, like impulse control. He later found out that he had ADHD and he had dyslexia. But at the time, the teachers did not know exactly what it was. So he was all the time put in closets. He was always disciplined. He was always treated unfairly and unkindly in school because the teachers did not know what to do with him. Later on, him and his family with his mother had an abusive husband, and she divorced him, and she got remarried to a son of a he was a boxer. He was into martial arts, and he was into boxing, and he was into that type of sport. So this man, once they moved to Atlanta, Georgia, this stepfather, taught the children martial arts, taught them self-discipline, but he still had his learning disabilities. He still had his ADHD that was unidentified. He still had his dyslexia, which was unheard of. So he was ruled as a trouble child because of what was going on in the early 1970s and late 1970s. The police were not very kind to young black men. They automatically assumed they were into trouble just for playing like kids. The police and leaders often assumed that these type of young men were juveniles and troublemakers and scoundrels when they were just being kids, and just because of the color of their skin or their poor, uneducated background, or supposedly uneducated background, that they automatically labeled them. But children with disabilities like this aren't uneducated. They just can't harness what is going on inside them. They can't focus what is going on. And so he was deemed trouble. But later in life, he went on and he graduated, and he decided to enroll into Berea College. Now, Berea College is a small college in the middle of Kentucky, off of Interstate 75. It's in the town of Berea. This college is very unique because it is a college where the tuition is paid for. It helps poor people, poor students, not just black, not just white or Hispanic or Latino or anything like that. This was for a college for everybody. And the tuition was paid for, but you just worked on campus and you had to keep up your grades. Because of his unidentified ADHD and dyslexia, he was learning techniques on how to do it, but still it was a very challenging thing. So he flunked out of Berea College for the first time. And then he went through life and had more struggles and had more difficulties and decided to try it again. And then he was succeeding and doing well. And he had it made up in his mind that he was going to do all he could do. He returned to that place of failure. And on his final exam for one particular class, his teacher was already giving him a hard time because of his past, because of who he was. His teacher decided to single him out and take his final paper and go to the library and research every nook and cranny of his paper. And he found 2 sentences in his entire paper that were questionable with academic plagiarism. Now, plagiarism is basically when you quote or basically quote your source word for word. You might change a few little words, but it's basically back to back identical to your source. That is plagiarism. That is a crime. That is an academic crime, and that will get you in trouble. And this teacher found two sentences that were very, very questionable. So, because of that, Mr. Davis was excused from Berea College a second time. Things went on through his life, and it was a very difficult time with everything going on. And he decided to go back a third time. And he went through the proper channels, and they didn't want him to go back, but they finally gave him a third chance. And I want to read to you a quote from Mr. Davis's book. This is from his Hasan Davis's book called Written Off. It published in 2016. Now this is the quote. It says, quote, "What I know now is that most people who fail rarely go back to the site of their greatest defeat. They move on. They change the story. They pretend it never happened. They create another story altogether. They go on to some other school. They go on to some other life. They rewrite the story. And nobody ever knows about their difficult moments. The fact that I came back was an anomaly," end quote. Now this is a quote from him saying people rarely go back to their place of failure. Why do you suppose that is? Why do you suppose people would actually choose not to go back to their place of failure? Is it because of the memories of their loss? Is it because of the knowledge of knowing they couldn't do it the first time? What would possess Mr. Davis to go back to his place of failure? Not just once, but twice. Once of his own doing, and the second time you could say it was his doing, or you could say it was probably a personal grudge with his professor. I don't know the answer to that. But why would he want to go back to his place of failure? Why would the children of Israel decide, okay, God says us to go back, but we've already failed once, and we lost miserably. Who's to say we're not going to fail again? But they had to return to their place of failure in order to not achieve deliverance. They already been delivered once, but they needed victory. I'll tell you why. Mr. Davis, this man that I'm speaking to, while attending Berea College, while attending this college and having knowledge of, I guess what you would say, with martial arts and different types of karate and northern Chinese jitsu and different jiu-jitsu, the different levels, the different, however you want to say it. But during that time, he got involved in the Upward Bound program. This is a program that allows high school students to come on campus to learn about the school, to possibly go to that school. And it also gives the students different techniques, skills. It gives them courage, strength to be able to go on to this school. While Mr. Davis was at Berea College, he was a teacher counselor at the Berea College program. And he taught a self-defense class. And during that class, for 2 different years, he had a young man that was, he was a white Caucasian boy, but he was legally blind, and he had some difficulties himself. But this man, Mr. Davis, he took this legally blind Caucasian boy under his wing, and taught him martial arts and self-defense. And then in the second year, this young disabled boy became Mr. Davis's assistant counselor and stayed under his wing and learned from him and helped him with the other students. And this young man, this young student of his, ended up helping teach self-defense classes to women's dorms, helped in different areas of his life. And I don't know if you have figured it out by now, but this young Caucasian boy, legally blind, didn't know much of anything, needed all the encouragement he could get, and got under Mr. Davis's wing. That young man was me. This was my teacher. This was my friend. I would follow this man anywhere. He taught me so much. And it was because he returned to his place of failure. He returned to a place of not deliverance, but he knew he had to have victory. And because he chose victory rather than deliverance, he taught other students about martial arts, and he taught them about self-defense, and he taught them about protecting yourself and discipline and honor. And now, all these years later, Hasan Davis is still going across the state of Kentucky and even traveling to other states and helping juveniles and helping different teenagers and young people about honor and discipline, and about how you don't have to accept your defeat, that you can return to the place that you have always failed in the past, to all the places you have been defeated in the past, and you can go back and you can defeat those demons. You can go back to them situations and you can get your victory. That's what Hasan does now. That's what Mr. Davis does now. And because of what he did for stepping up and saying, I will not accept this, I'm going back and I'm going to the place where I failed. In his quote, he says, what I know now is that most people who fail rarely go back to the site of their greatest defeat. That is absolutely true. He said they move on. They changed the story. The children of Israel could have changed the story. They could have not have gone back to Ai. They could have went somewhere else. And perhaps they could have won. Perhaps they could have not. Because they chose to go back to Ai just like God said. Look how much victory they had. Look how much victory they had with Joshua and God leading them. Mr. Davis says that they change the story. They pretend it never happened. Some of us do the same thing. Some of us go to our place of failure and just pretend it never happened. So you just stay away. It's like, well, it just never happened. He said they create another story altogether. They go on to some other school. They go on with some other life. They rewrite the story because they're afraid. Well, that's my part. That's not the quote. And the quote keeps saying, it says, and nobody ever knows about their difficult moments. How many people know about your failures? How many people know about your situations? But see, if you go back to your place of failure and you get your victory, then you can tell people. It's much more encouraging to someone else to tell them that you had victory even though you had all these failures. If you had victory right off the bat, how encouraging is that to someone who keeps failing? Say, well, are you saying that you're better than me? No. I had failures too. Absolutely, I've had failures. But it's because of people like Hasan Davis that decided to go back to their place of failure that people like me are still here. I don't know how many times throughout my life, the discipline I was taught, the techniques I was taught, the processes that I was taught, the love that I was taught, and this with all his background, with all Mr. Davis's background, he had, me and him had nothing in common. I didn't have any kind of background that he had. I've never seen, never heard of it. A lot of the things he's had to go through. But he took me under his wing regardless. And he showed me things in life with discipline and honor, and just showed me that I can do more than I thought I could. That's the kind of people we need in our lives. We need the people like Joshua. He says, okay, we messed up, but we need to go back. We need more people like Hasan Davis, who is now working with juveniles and trying his best to change people's lives all throughout the state, all throughout the United States, or wherever he goes. So I encourage you today, if you get anything out of this, I want to encourage you. I don't know what kind of failures you've had. I don't know anything that's happened in your life I couldn't possibly imagine. But I know you failed. We all have. We've all failed, and we've all wanted out of our situations. So God has allowed us deliverance. But we still got to go back to get victory. We still have to go back, because we got to return to those places of failures. We can't let those things dictate our life. We don't need to rewrite the story. God's already written our story. We just have to believe in ourselves that we can finish the story. So please, please listen to me. It is worth it. It is absolutely worth going back to your places of failure. Going back to the places where you have let down someone, or you have been let down, or some place that you have achieved nothing except a discouraged heart and loneliness and whatever else that the devil has lied to you about. You are capable of victory. You are capable of going back to your place of failure. So I thank you for listening today. I hope that this message was encouraging. This man, I hope that you're not the type of person who judges someone by their outward appearance. Because if you read Mr. Davis's story, he doesn't sound like someone that probably a lot of us would ever be friends with. Now, I met him before I was an apostolic, but still, if I seen him today, I would give him the biggest hug, the biggest handshake. I would give him my last dollar to help him, because this man has given me more than anything I could possibly think of. So I just encourage you. I can't remember exactly where his book is published. If you need to know, drop a note in the comments, and I will look it up and find out, or I will try to get in touch with you. But his book is called Written Off. His name is Hasan Davis, and this man changed my life. He absolutely changed my life, and I'm so thankful to have known him. But above all that, you need to ask God for one more time to show you victory over the places where you've failed, because you can't keep marching around the wilderness forever. Eventually, you're going to have to come to the point where you're going to have to find victory instead of deliverance. My name is Brother Chris Lips. This is Apostolic Audio Ministries. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. Please, if you like this channel, we have here in a couple weeks, I have a whole bunch of audio CDs of preaching, different preaching, not me, but other people, that I'm going to start putting on this channel. So you're going to have new stuff instead of just listening to me. But I'm going to be working on it here in a couple of weeks. So please hit the bell for notifications. That way you know when something new has been put on the channel. thank you for listening. Please, you all be careful. Be very, very careful. I wish you all the best. I pray for you. I hope that everyone stays safe during this difficult time. Something we've never seen before, but we will have victory. We will not be defeated in this. We will have victory. We don't need deliverance. We need victory. This is Apostolic Audio Ministries.